Fact number 19. The Lord promised the saints will not be removed from their lands in Missouri. Later, the saints are removed. Many people started making plans for their journey. In the Revelation, the Lord called Missouri the land of the saints' inheritance, echoing biblical descriptions of a promised land flowing with milk and honey. There, the saints were to build the city of Zion. Fayette and Kirtland were small villages, but Independence was little more than a backwater trading post. The town was a point of departure for trails going west, so it drew fur trappers and teamsters, along with farmers and small businessmen. Joseph had known people in most of these trades all his life, but he found the men in Independence especially godless and rough. And more government agents in the town were suspicious of missionaries and would likely make preaching to the Indians difficult, if not impossible. Discouraged, he took his concerns to the Lord. "When will the wilderness blossom as the rose?" he asked. "When will Zion be built up in her glory? And where will thy temple stand?" On July 20th, 6 days after his arrival, Joseph's prayers were answered. "This land," the Lord told him, "is the land which I have appointed and consecrated for the gathering of the saints." They had no reason to look elsewhere. "This is the land of promise," he declared, "and the place for the city of Zion." The saints were to purchase as much of the available land as possible, build homes, and plant fields. And on the bluff west of the courthouse, they were to build a temple. Desperate to receive specific directions for the Missouri saints, Joseph prayed to the Lord. "What more dost thou require at their hands," he asked, "before thou wilt come and save them?" He waited for an answer, but the Lord gave him no new instructions for Zion. On August 18th, Joseph wrote personally to Edward and other leaders in Zion. "I know not what to say to you," he admitted. He had sent them a copy of the August 6th revelation, and he assured them that God would deliver them from danger. "I have his immutable covenant that this shall be the case," Joseph testified, "but God is pleased to keep it from mine eyes, the means of how exactly the thing will be done." In the meantime, Joseph urged the saints should trust in the promises the Lord had already given them. He counseled the saints to be patient, rebuild the printing office and store, and seek legal ways to recover their losses. He also implored them not to abandon the promised land, and he sent them a more detailed plan for the city. "It is the will of the Lord," he wrote, "that not 1 foot of land purchased should be given to the enemies of God or sold to them." Joseph continued to pray, and in December he finally received a revelation for the saints in Zion. The Lord declared that they had been afflicted for their sins, but he had compassion on them and promised they would not be forsaken. They must needs be chastened and tried, even as Abraham. He explained to Joseph, "For all those who will not endure chastening, but deny me, cannot be sanctified." While the revelation urged peaceful negotiations with the people of Independence, the Lord also indicated that Zion could be reclaimed by power. He told a parable about a vineyard that had been taken from the slothful servants and destroyed by an enemy. When the Lord of the vineyard saw the destruction, he chastened the servants for their negligence and called them to action. "Go and gather together the residue of my servants, and take all the strength of mine house," he commanded. "And go ye straightway unto the land of my vineyard, and redeem my vineyard." The Lord did not interpret the parable, but he told the saints that it reflects his will for the redemption of Zion. As he had before, the Lord instructed saints to purchase land in Zion and seek legal, peaceful means to get back what they had lost. "Zion shall not be moved out of her place," he declared. "They that remain and are pure in heart shall return and come to their inheritance." 2 months later, Parley Pratt and Lehman White came to Kirtland with more news from Missouri. Friendly people across the river from Jackson County had given the saints food and clothes in exchange for labor, but they were still scattered and discouraged. They wanted to know when and how Zion would be rescued from its enemies. After hearing the report, Joseph rose from his chair and announced that he was going to Zion. For 6 months, he had offered encouraging words and hope to the saints there as he dealt with the other challenges in Kirtland. Now he wanted to do something for them, and he wanted to know who would join him. In April 1834, at a meeting of a small branch of the church in New York, 27-year-old Wilford Woodruff listened to Parley Pratt recount the Lord's latest revelation to Joseph Smith. It called on the saints to raise 500 men to march with the prophet to Missouri. The redemption of Zion must needs come by power, the Lord declared. Let no man be afraid to lay down his life for my sake. Wilford and a handful of saints left for Zion on May 1st. Joseph, Brigham, Heber, and the Holbrooks, along with about 100 other volunteers, left Kirtland several days later and joined up with Wilford along the road. Once assembled, the force was only a small fraction of the 500 the Lord had called for, but they headed west in good spirits, determined to fulfill the Lord's word. On June 4th, after a month of marching, the camp reached the Mississippi River. Joseph was tired and sore from the journey, but he felt ready to confront the challenges that lay ahead. He learned that reports and rumors of the camp's movements have already reached Missouri, and hundreds of settlers were preparing for a fight. He wondered whether the saints were strong enough to face them. The camp is in as good a situation as could be expected, he wrote Emma, while sitting on the riverbank, but our numbers and means are altogether too small. Several days later, Parley Pratt and Orson Hyde came to the camp with unwelcome news. Governor Dunklin had refused to provide militia support for the saints. Without the governor's aid, the camp knew they would not be able to help the Missouri Saints return to their land in Zion peacefully. Joseph and his captains decided to press on. They hoped to reach the exiled saints in Clay County, north of the Mississippi River, and help them negotiate a compromise with the people of Jackson County. The camp of Israel cut across the central Missouri prairie. About a day's journey from their destination, a black woman, possibly a slave, called out to them nervously, "There's a company of men here who are calculating to kill you this morning as you pass through," she said. The camp marched cautiously on. Plagued by wagon problems, they were forced to stop for the night on a hill overlooking a fort in the Fishing River, still 10 miles from the exiled saints. As they pitched their tents, they heard the rumbling of horse hooves as 5 men rode into camp. The strangers brandished with weapons and boasted that more than 300 men were on their way to wipe the saints out. Over the next few days, the camp of Israel made contact with the saints in Clay County, while Joseph met with officials from surrounding counties to explain the purpose of the march and pled for the saints in Zion. "We are anxious for a settlement of the difficulties existing between us," Joseph told them. "We want to live in peace with all men, and equal rights is all we require." The officials agreed to help calm the anger of their fellow citizens, but they warned the camp not to go into Jackson County. If the saints tried to march into Independence, a bloody battle could break out. The next day, June 22nd, in a council with church leaders, Joseph received a revelation for the camp of Israel. The Lord accepted the sacrifices of its members, but redirected their efforts to obtaining divine power. Quote, "Zion cannot be built up," he declared, "unless it is by the principles of the law of the celestial kingdom." End quote. The Lord told the saints that they should wait to redeem Zion until they had prepared themselves through learning and experience to do the will of God. "And this cannot be brought to pass," he explained, "until mine elders are endowed with power from on high." This endowment was to come in the Lord's house, the temple in Kirtland. The Lord was pleased, however, with those who had marched in the camp of Israel. "I have heard their prayers and will accept their offering," he said, "and it is expedient in me that they should be brought thus far for a trial of their faith." In late June, William Phelps and other church leaders in Clay County wrote the prophet to tell him that the local officials had summoned church leaders to the courthouse, where they discussed the saints' future in their county. The officials had spoken calmly and politely, but their words left no room for compromise. Since the saints could not return to Jackson County, the officials recommended that they look for a new place to live, somewhere they could be by themselves. The church leaders in Clay County agreed to leave, rather than risk another violent expulsion. 3 days later, Oliver arrived in Kirtland with a full report of the attacks in Missouri. To quiet the mobs, Edward Partridge and other church leaders had signed a pledge promising the people of Independence that the saints would leave Jackson County by the spring. None of them wanted to abandon Zion, but refusing to sign the pledge would have only put the saints in more peril. Horrified by the violence, Joseph approved of the decision to evacuate. The next day, Oliver wrote church leaders in Missouri, instructing them to look for another place to settle. "Be wise in your selection," he advised. "Another place of beginning will be no injury to Zion in the end."